I've been journaling for 6 years, but if I'm being honest, I've really only been growing from journaling for three. When I was in high school, I started journaling as a junior, and for a while, it helped me a ton. It was incredible. But when I got to my freshman year at Cornell, my journaling growth flatlined really hard. And it's been over 3 years since then. My journaling has never grown me more than it does now. I've gotten incredible benefits from it. The biggest reason is because I went from level 1 to level 4 journaling. And beforehand, I didn't even know there were more levels. Since my freshman year at Cornell, I've created 1,000 plus journal entries. I've taken over 4 note taking and journaling courses. I've talked to 50 plus freshmen about their relationship to journaling. And I've even created a cosmic journaling kit, which is a gamified system, easy to follow, with 200 plus journaling questions and 5 plus journaling templates to help you grow your emotional intelligence, your emotional centeredness, your self understanding, and your purposefulness. That's coming out January 1st to heighten the reflection of the new year. So if you want to get that for free, sign up for it in the description below. But this video as a whole is going to be about how to go from level 1 to level 4 journaling, where the power of journaling is indescribable. You don't even know that the other 3 levels exist, like I did when I was just doing level 1. So to dive into that, let's start by going through my own journaling story from freshman or junior year high school all the way up to now. And then we'll dive into the 4 levels of journaling using that. So I started journaling when I was a junior in high school. And one of the big reasons for that is I was going through a difficult time. I was going through a lot of body dysmorphia issues and dieting issues. I had this vision that I would become this ripped, six-packed individual and everyone would love me. So I went on what's called the anabolic diet, where I was eating as low protein, as high protein, not low protein, and low calorie as possible to artificially stuff myself up. And it worked. It worked way too well, actually. I lost 30 pounds in just 3 months. And my chin was so chiseled that I probably could have cut the chicken for the salad that I was eating every single day with it. But I was doing terribly. I was suffering from a lot of self-doubt, from imposter syndrome, from comparison, from perfectionism, partly from the dieting, but also partly from wanting to get into Cornell University or another Ivy League and feeling like I wasn't good enough from my little small town of Hamilton, New York, which has more cows than women. It's so small. So I started journaling. And for a while, journaling was incredible for me. I would sit down, I'd write about my day, and I would see my emotions and my thoughts out on the page. It really helped me for a while until my freshman year of Cornell. Cornell hit me like a bus from your first exam in college, and I stopped journaling as consistently. I got burned out. I got feeling like journaling wasn't as helpful as doing more for my clubs, my friendships, and my classwork. Even when I did journal, there was a lot of problems that I faced, which was blank page paralysis. What the heck do I write? I had a fear of going deeper. I knew that if I journaled more, stuff that might be uncomfortable for me to navigate would come up. I was making stuff real by writing it on the page. I didn't know where to start to go past daily journaling. Was there more to journaling aside from just journaling on a day-to-day? I knew that I wanted to grow more, but I wasn't getting it from just doing daily journaling anymore. I was also scared of getting judged by my friends, not harshly, but none of them were journaling. So if I started journaling and then even shared my journals with one of them, I felt icky about it. It wasn't, I was a stereotypical, not very emotionally intelligent guy. And I was very inconsistent with my journaling practice. I would sometimes do it for 30 minutes, not do it for 2 weeks, and then do it again. And I remember one day in particular, after I went through a whole difficult breakup with my first friend group, where I sat down with my journaling page and I just couldn't write anything. I was paralyzed with this sense that if I actually wrote more, very uncomfortable things about my relationship to myself, friendship, and focus would come up. And I just sat there for like an hour or two, not writing anything. And I asked myself in that moment one key question, which changed everything for me over the next few years. And that was, is there more to journaling? That is the question that I want to dive into very deeply in this video. And if you stay with me, you will see that the rabbit hole goes so much deeper than you ever thought journaling could go. Because what I was doing my entire Cornell experience and my junior year was just the first level of journaling out of the 4 deep, fulfilling, enriching levels that there are. The levels that can build your emotional centeredness, build your self-understanding, your purposefulness to degrees you never thought possible, help you make better college decisions because they're rooted in who you are and not who you think others want you to be, in getting through self-deception instead of falling for self-deception, in becoming so emotionally centered that you baffle your friends at how calm you are when you do exams. And also having a beautiful record of what you were doing that first spring day in April 2019 or 2026 if you start journaling now. So let's dive into the 4 levels of journaling. I'll give you a rough overview of each. Level 1 journaling is daily journaling. Level 2 is reflective journaling. Level 3 is decision journaling. And level 4, the highest level that there is level 4 spiritual journaling. You ready? I've spent like thousands of hours thinking about this topic in one way or another. So I'm really excited to talk about it with you. And I want you to sit down and really dig into this episode because this is some deep stuff here. So, level 1 journaling. Level 1 journaling is when you sit down, pen and pad or notebook or whatever you use to journal, and you write about your day. You write about the emotions that came up, the thoughts that came up, experiences you had. An analogy that I like to use, which I'll use throughout all the 4 levels of journaling, is think of daily journaling like wanting to fly through space to study it, not having the resources to or the drive. And so instead of flying through space, you look at space through your telescope. And this is fantastic if you want to get into space or you want to get into journaling for the first time. Level 1 journaling is the starting point that I think you should start at. But here's the problem. You're looking at the light, but not at the lens through which you see the light. You're focused only on writing about your day, about your emotions, about your thoughts, and not exploring the patterns of what emotions and thought loops come up over your life, how they're affecting you, why they're affecting you that way, and where they're coming from. This is the fundamental mistake that I made throughout my journaling and freshman journaling experiences and is why journaling stopped growing me, is I stopped at level 1. But it goes so much deeper than level 1. So let's go on to level 2, which is where the rubber really meets the road. I want to give a warning before we dive into level 2, which is the insights in the rest of this video can be destabilizing and easily misinterpreted. So if you're someone that is going through a very difficult mental health experience, or you aren't feeling stable to some degree in your life right now, I would really recommend some forewarning before going into this video. I want to encourage you to take nothing that I say at face value. Everything should be questioned, should be scientifically thought about and applied and experimented with in order to see if it's true. We don't want to turn this whole 4 levels of journaling into an ideology in itself. This channel is not about making rules to live life by. It's about guiding you on your spiritual journey in college. So, with that warning out of the way, let's dive into level 2 journaling. Level 2 journaling and reflective journaling, you stop just asking about your day and start asking what patterns are showing up, how they're affecting you, why they're affecting you that way, and where they're coming from. You are looking into the frames through which you come to college with. Now, what is a frame? A frame is the lens through which you as an individual, group, or culture senses, perceives, feels, thinks, acts, and relates to the world. A frame is an invisible coating of glass built from both individual and collective frames. Those can be, as an individual, sensations, perceptions, emotions, thoughts, behaviors, values, identities, skills, principles, models, theories. And as a collective, frames can be built of relationships, languages, structures, processes, cultures, technologies, and systems. That all seems really abstract, but let me give you 3 concrete examples of a frame that you are using right now so that you understand how this is happening all the time. It's impossible to escape frames. For example, you might be framing college as a means of getting a profitable career. I'm not saying that's 100% true, but the fact is you have some frame towards college. It might be getting a career. It might be finding yourself. It might be making incredible friends, or a mix of all those. You might be framing what a good friend should look like, namely giving me boatloads of money. I'm just kidding. You don't have to have that frame unless you want to, because I do like myself money, but that's probably not the best frame to have for a friend. You might have for a frame as a friend, though, someone that understands you, someone that makes you feel like you can be authentic around them, someone that makes you laugh. You have some frames about what makes a good friend. And finally, you're framing this video. You are experiencing emotions, thoughts, other things in reaction to what I'm saying. Hopefully, because I've tried to structure it to be very insightful, some of the things that you're experiencing are insight. Or you might be saying, what is this weird Dutch short man doing with gold glasses, gold-coated glasses, and golden earrings shouting at me about reflective journaling? This is very strange. Whatever it is, you're still framing this video in some way. Going back to our analogy, this is like reflective journaling is like realizing that you're exiting into space. You're no longer just looking at it through your telescope. And you are being guided on where to go by NASA, some recommended path. But you are aware that you are not looking at space objectively. You are looking at it through an array of glass from your spaceship. And not only are you looking at it through your array of glass, you are looking at it as you, a human being, is looking through that glass. A human being with frames through which they relate to the world. So the mindset shift that comes with reflective journaling is focusing less about space and what it is you're seeing, but rather how it is that you're seeing it and why you're seeing it that way and how it's affecting you through the glass of your spacesuit, of your spaceship, and as you, a person with frames. There's a fundamental insight that comes on top of this, and that is our internal relationship affects our external. Therefore, it's actually often more effective to focus on navigating our internal relationships than our external ones when it comes to challenges. Let me give you some examples to make this concrete. Let's say you're struggling to figure out your major. The external problem is you just need to do more classes so that you can find yourself out. Seems to make sense. But the internal problem creating the external one is, or the internal frame creating the external one, is that we're scared of committing and therefore leaving things open. And the crucial insight is that if you just focus on the external frame or the external problem, namely not knowing what major to do, you're not solving the internal relationship or the internal frame that's creating the problem of not knowing what major, namely that you're scared of commitment. Another example is maybe you're super busy from clubs. You're too busy from being in so many clubs at once that you struggle to see your friends or you struggle to study for classwork. That's the external problem. And yet the internal frame creating it is that you're overcompensating from a feeling of inadequacy comparing yourself to all the students around you. And that actually makes you need to do more clubs in order to fulfill that comparison fear. Do you see how, again, just focusing on the external problem doesn't solve the internal root issue causing that problem? Another example is friends always coming to you for emotional support, and it gets overwhelming. The external problem is you never have time to focus on yourself because you're always being asked for help from your friends. But the internal problem creating this is that you actually crave the love and need because you weren't loved by your parents as a child. And therefore, you could set boundaries. You could stop your friends always asking you for emotional support, but you don't. You don't because secretly you love the attention. Last example, perhaps you're addicted to your phone. This is a common one. I have my phone right here. And the external problem is that short form is too engaging. You need to use the phone less. You'll often hear self-improvement YouTubers or other books say, it's the dopamine. It's the difficulty of not being engaged by all this novelty. That's the problem. And yes, that's part of it. But again, that's the external problem. The internal frame that could be leading to that problem is you're too uncomfortable alone and scared of what will come up if you actually let yourself sit in a room by yourself with the thoughts arising and the emotions arising. Maybe you'll realize that you need to change your major, or that you did something terrible to a friend and you need to accept responsibility. And that's what's actually making you addicted to your phone is you need to temper those things down. You're fearful of them. I'm not saying any of these are 100% true for you, but the meta insight here is that your internal frames lead to the external challenge. Which isn't to say that you should relinquish all need to change the external and do absolutely nothing about the external at all. Of course, that's not what I'm saying. But if you do change the external, you do so from the foundation that it is your internal relationship leading to the external problem. Then you will change the external with so much more power from before. You'll realize that no external change will ever fulfill you without internal change first. So a natural question then becomes, why don't we navigate our internal relationship, our internal frames more? And I actually want you to contemplate this question because it has a profound answer and one that will frame all of the reflective journaling that you do. So either pause the video and think about it for a minute or two, or actually get out a pen pad and write about this. And I'm going to trust that as I keep talking, you've done this exercise, you've thought about this, because that's how you really get the power out of this reflective journaling, is you think about it yourself instead of just taking my word for it. So why don't we navigate our internal relationship more? The insight is it's because our self is here for survival, not for seeking truth. What do I mean by the self? The self is everything that you think that you are. All the frames encapsulated into one. It is your values. It is the emotions you feel, the thoughts you feel, your sensations, everything, your relationships that are close to you. You identify with the self because we survive on a psychological realm, not a physical one. We're surviving the frames of ourself. What I mean by that is, in especially modern society, if you're watching this video, at least in an elite college, you're probably not facing significant physical danger at this moment, except for going across the street and potentially being mauled by a car, or hiking and being attacked by a bear, although that's not very likely either. We survive primarily on a psychological level now. Even if we weren't in an elite college setting, though, and we were in a more physically dangerous one, I want you to still realize that it is the psychological realm which we are surviving on. Think about it. If you were in a coma and your brain was technically still active, but the idea of you was not, because you weren't fully conscious and able to continue surviving your sense of reality from moment to moment, in pretty much all purposes, the idea of you, yourself, would be dead. And this is highly insightful because it leads to a question, which is, why does our self exist, right? And which ultimately answers why we're scared of navigating our internal relationship. The self exists because we don't want to die. Like, I mean, on a physical level, if you didn't prioritize yourself to some degree over other things inside of the external world, you wouldn't have an incentive to eat. You would just be like, oh, I mean, myself, other stuff, no difference. So why would I eat the other stuff to survive myself? No point. So you would die, right? The fact that you're watching this video means there's got to be some semblance of self guiding you. Otherwise, you'd just be dead. And that's the obvious reason, right? The more insightful reason is the only way the infinite can experience itself is through fooling itself into the fact that it's finite. The only way the infinite can experience itself is through fooling itself into thinking it's finite. Think about it. If you didn't construct this sense of self with values, with emotions, with thoughts, with relationships, with beliefs, if you just shed all of that, what would you be? You would be infinite. There is no definition. The infinite, non-dual, empty, formless. And yet, don't mistake me into thinking that I mean also that infinite doesn't have any form. The infinite is holistic. It includes both form and non-form, right? So the self actually helps you continue to survive as a finite being. If the self wasn't there, you would just dissolve into infinity. So it has to stay there. It needs to survive. And this is why the self is so scared of changing, because it is terrified of dissolving. It is terrified of losing its sense of reality. If you suddenly, here's a thought experiment that'll help you understand. If I snap my fingers and suddenly a whole bunch of your beliefs changed, or a whole bunch of your emotions changed, or a whole bunch of your thought loops changed, not just now, but just for the rest of your life, you would die. Your self right now is gone, and you have a different sense of reality. That is terrifying, and it's why the self is not allowing you to change. It's why you're not letting yourself sit alone without any distractions from your phone. Because to come to the thoughts that you're feeling and the emotions you're feeling with more awareness would mean change. It would mean dying psychologically. There's one other point which will help you understand why the self exists at all, and that is, in a more scientific lens, there is a genius researcher who I love named John Vervaeke. He's a professor of cognitive science at Toronto. And he has a theory called recursive relevance realization, which is essentially a theory for how we find relevance in information in the environment and realize actions because of it. So let me give you some idea of how it works. At any given time, what John Vervaeke realized is that there is an infinite amount of information that you could pay attention to. You could pay attention to my finger right here. You could pay attention to my finger right here, my facial expression, the things that I'm saying. You could pay attention to the feeling in your posture, in your stomach from potentially not having eaten since started watching this video. You could pay attention to the sounds around you as you're watching this video. Infinite amount of things you could pay attention to. There needs to be something which constrains that information and finds things relevant. Because if it didn't, you would just explode. Not literally, but you would explode from the amount of stuff you could pay attention to. That thing is yourself. That is what helps you constrain what to pay attention to. Because if you didn't have it at all, there would be nothing constraining what to pay attention to, which is impossible for a living finite thing. Again, you would just enter infinity. This is a recursive process. It's happening all the time. There is no point at which it is not happening, because if it stopped happening, yourself would be entirely gone. And finding relevance in the environment helps you then realize action, helps you move, helps you think, helps you do stuff, which then recursively alters what you find relevant. It's a self-dynamical, autopoetic, changing process. As you find things relevant and then realize actions, you change what you find relevant to realize actions. And this is the irony of the self, which is that you are always changing. Yourself is constantly different. Think about how different you were 5-10 years ago compared to now. And yet, the self always resists that change because it knows at every point that it could die by change. So let me give you some examples to ground this, and then I'll tie it back to reflective journaling at the end. Let's say you're arguing about science with someone. How are you surviving yourself in this instance? You're surviving your identity of being scientific. You stopped arguing about self. You said, no, I'm gonna call off the cards. I'm never gonna argue about science again. The identity of you being a scientist, someone that wants to value that and others to value that, would die. Not maybe totally, but it would be diminished. Let's say you're debating in debate. You're surviving your identity of being rational, of being someone who argues, who can be logical. Let's say you're getting a gift for your friends. How possibly be surviving yourself now? This is not selfish. This is selfless. Well, you could be surviving your identity of being a good friend. Because if you didn't get gifts, if you didn't celebrate their birthday, how good of a friend are you? Going to church on Sunday, you're surviving your identity of being Christian. If you stopped going to church on Sundays, the major ritual that Christians do, that part of you would be diminished and eventually potentially die. And then finally, studying for class. You're surviving your identity of achievement, of being a good student. Because if you stopped studying, if you started getting terrible grades, that identity would go away. This isn't just individually happening, it's also collectively happening. Let's say your friend group is surviving your procrastination identity together by avoiding doing work in the same setting. If one of your friends suddenly said, "Hey, we're procrastinating, we should be more effective in our studying methods," and then you set up a ritual where all your friends said, "Okay, we're going to set a timer and we're going to be super diligent with studying, and if we're not, then we get back to track," and you actually set that in place, that collective identity, because self isn't just an individual thing, it's also a collective thing, that collective identity would die. Procrastination identity. Another collective example is college surviving the elitist culture by only accepting really, really top-notch students or small amounts of people. You've seen it. Cornell itself has like a 5% acceptance rate. It might be different now. If they stopped doing that, that elitist culture would die. It would no longer be seen as an Ivy League. And then finally, a political club surviving its critical thinking by accepting both liberal and conservative members. If they stopped accepting both liberal and conservative members, there wouldn't be as much critical thought happening in the club because they would be all a groupthink of one group politically, just talking with each other. So if they stopped doing that, the critical thinking identity would die. Now, there is a counter argument here, which is, but Aiden, isn't the self highly practical? All the examples that you've given, it seems like, why would we get rid of the self? It doesn't make sense. The self is super practical. It's super useful from a day-to-day. You yourself said that if you got rid of the self, you would enter infinity, you would dissolve, you would completely die. So why would we do it? That's exactly what makes the self so deceptive. Its interest is in surviving, not in truth. If its interest was in truth, it wouldn't survive itself, because it would realize that all the emotions, all the thoughts, all the beliefs that it's had, or most of them, have never been interested in truth with a capital T. They've been interested in survival. Now, how is it self-deceptive? This gets really deep. There's cognitive biases and heuristics, which are the easy option. You might have heard of these from books like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I was a psychology major, so I learned a lot about some of these things, like confirmation bias. Usually looking for information that confirms your views rather than information that disconfirms them. The fundamental attribution error is another cognitive bias, which is always assuming that if other person does something wrong, it's because of them and who they are as a person. Whereas if you do something wrong, there's always a reason why you're not responsible. Like, I was late because traffic was unfair. It didn't have anything to do with me. getting up after my alarm clock or anything like that. But those are the easy ways to see that the self is self-deceptive. The cognitive biases and heuristics. Those are nothing compared to the depth at which this can go. It goes so much deeper than you might ever realize. I want you to realize the self is self-deceptive at the root of awareness. It is so self-deceptive, so incredibly intelligent. It's honestly beautiful. It's truly so beautiful how self-deceptive it is, that it can completely alter the frames through which you come to college with, the emotions you have, the thoughts you have, the beliefs you have, the relationships you have, on a level unimaginable to you right now. Unimaginable even to me, because the self-deceptive nature never goes away. In fact, that itself is a self-deception. If you ever think you've gotten through self-deception, you are definitely deceived. Because it never ends. The only way for it to end is if you stopped having frames, which means you'd just be dead. To have frames is to self-deceive yourself, because you are putting finitude on something infinite. Some examples of this: assumptions, huge self-deception. Assuming that you know anything. Assuming that, for example, level 1 daily journaling is the only form of journaling there is. That's an assumption. But it goes so much deeper than that. I'm talking about the assumptions that you don't even realize are assumptions. Assuming that reality is a material, objective, rational place. That is an assumption. Assuming that science can give us all the answers. I'm not saying that you believe this 100% again, but these are just examples. Assuming science can give all the answers, when science itself cannot be used to validate science. You need something else, something higher to validate science. So science, literally by definition, cannot give us all the answers because it cannot validate itself. Something else needs to validate it. Which is why often you hear religious people say, well, science cannot help us find truth because truth is outside of the realm of science. And in that regard, they are right, just not in the way that some of them might think, which is a whole nother video topic, but can't get into that there. Another self-deception is shedding responsibility. It doesn't have anything to do with me. It's all their fault. This is going back to the fundamental attribution error, assuming other people do things wrong because of their character, but you do not. And then here's another huge one. I'll use this as the last example. Misunderstanding or mistaking understanding for appreciating. One of the biggest things that I hear when I talk about the ideas that I talk about in these videos, hear it all the time, is like, oh, but Aiden, that's obvious. I understand it. I get it. Yes, you get it. But do you appreciate it? See, understanding usually comes from the propositional level of knowing about things, remembering facts, being able to talk about them semantically and explain them. That's where understanding is. But appreciating goes to a much deeper level of knowing. Appreciating goes to the deepest level of knowing, which is experiencing that insight, relating to it in the very way through which you frame reality, frame college. If you want to learn more about arcs of knowing and how it is that you relate to things like that, check out my whole hugely long video on spiral knowing, the theory of learning, teaching, and knowing, which I came up with to describe this exact thing, which is mistaking understanding for appreciating. The insight that I want you to take away from here is that the self is infinitely deceptive, because the more you unveil about yourself, the more you unveil the frames through which it's coming to college with, the more 5D ways, 5D chess that it has to play to continue deceiving you. You would be astounded at how intelligent this self-deception is. And I give you one more example just to really harper in. Oh my God, it's so intelligent. So when I was in my early years in this planet, I used to read a ton of books. I was a huge fiction fantasy reader. Every single night I would read for so long. My dad even has pictures of me with a book on my chest. I've fallen asleep with it. And when I got to junior year, or not junior year, when I got to middle school, I stopped reading and I started playing video games all throughout middle and high school. And I didn't really think much of it at the time. I was like, reading was my early childhood season, but you grow out of reading and you start doing more cool stuff like playing video games, which is what all my friends were doing. And I kind of validated it like that. Like, video games are fun. They're engaging. It's what everyone else is doing in my school. So, it's fine to play video games every now and then. As long as I'm keeping up with schoolwork decently, then it's okay. And I did this for most of middle school and high school. I just played a lot of video games, like thousands of hours of Terraria and Minecraft and Civilization 6, Witcher 3. I loved it. And then in my junior year of high school, I picked up a book called Actionable Gamification by Yukai Chao. It talked all about how video games target these fundamental core drives of human motivation, 8 different core drives, which without any of those, we have no motivation to do anything. When I read this, I was gobstuck. I remember I was walking around the basement of my house just in circles as I did, because I used to walk so much during that time, because it was during the anabolic dieting phase. And I just stopped flat in my tracks with my mouth wide open, because I realized that I had been tricking myself into replacing real life with video games because of all the ways they motivated me in the video game. And it was like in a flash of insight, I saw how I had deceived myself the entire of middle school and high school, years of my life, into doing this, all because of how they motivated me like real life should have. But I was just using video games to replace it. And over the years, I realized the self-deception goes so much deeper, because the big reason I was playing video games back then too is I was hiding from my weird childhood self in order to have friends. You see, I was a really weird kid. I used to beat, with my twin brother, I'd beat people with sticks. Don't worry, I don't do it anymore, unless people are mean. I'm joking. I used to beat people with sticks, and I had spoke really weirdly. I had struggles maintaining any sense of conversation. Also, I lived on the hill outside of my town, so that didn't help, because everyone else was in the town, and then I was on this hill, kind of like isolated from them. I wasn't in the same environment, so I didn't speak the same really like language. And I mean, I spoke English, but not like the same little pieces of language that they might. And I was kind of like an outsider. And video games were my way of making my way into the friend groups in town, because everyone else was playing video games and I didn't have to speak as much in normal conversation. I could just play the video game. So I realized years later, the self-deception was so much deeper. It wasn't just that video games were motivating me in the same way that real life should. It was that I was using them to hide from my childhood weird self so that I could even have friends. Wow. And this leads into another insight, which I want you to have, which is I don't want you to see the self as a purely bad thing. You know, I've framed it sort of as this like self-deception survival machine, which makes it sound bad, but it's working for your good. It's surviving to help you. to some degree. So don't come towards yourself with distrust all the time, with a feeling of negativity. Come towards yourself with incredible compassion and love. This being is so intelligent. It's so smart. It's trying to help you. The only issue is when that help becomes clouded because it's adapting to an environment that you're no longer in or to a value that you no longer have or whatnot. So some examples of it helping you, just so that to really harbor in this point, is let's go back to the friend procrastination example. Maybe it keeps you procrastinating in your friend group because it wants to help you keep friends. And being relaxed helps with that. I used to be way too focused and deep work prone, and I couldn't make as many friends because I couldn't relax. I couldn't procrastinate with friends because it felt so bad. So yourself might be helping you because of that. Maybe you're studying too much for class, but it's getting you to do that because it wants you to have a profitable career so that you don't have to be wage entrapped and stuck doing something that you don't want to do day in, day out. Maybe it's getting you to argue about science because it doesn't want you to fall into the historical traps of fundamentalist religion, which of course not most religious people in elite colleges don't fall into those traps anymore. But there's a fear still of falling back into that time. So maybe that's why it's getting you to argue so much about science. Another example, maybe it has gives you a bad intuition about a relationship before you commit. It's warning you not to get into that relationship. There's so many red flags that you might not be able to mention consciously, but yourself is trying to tell you through your intuition. And maybe, lastly, it's giving you a good intuition about this weird guy yapping at you about the self and its relationship to journaling. And with these awful hexagonal glasses, it's giving you this good intuition because it knows deep down what I'm telling you right now is the most profound things that you could be doing in college. Listen to that. The self is not always bad. Come to it with compassion and love. Why is everything that I'm telling you so important for reflective journaling? Why? Right. Firstly, selfishness is the main human driver of human-related problems throughout all of history. If you sum up all human-related problems that have happened, every single one can almost always be rooted back to selfishness. It's really the universal thing. It's also the root of bad decision making. It's impossible to make good long-term decisions when we don't have a good root in self-understanding. How are you supposed to know what major you should do if you don't even know what you value or what you want to do in the world, what your life purpose is? Another thing is the self is never satisfied. As you accomplish one thing, the self always wants another. Not just in money. I'm trusting if you're watching this video, you've probably ascended past the I just want money, I just want sex, I just want drugs sort of relationship that some of the world is in. But even then, after that, everything else, it always wants more. Relationships. It's never satisfied with the degree of love that you feel from your friends or your romantic partner. It always wants more. And when you don't realize this, you spend your whole life chasing things instead of being. Instead of just being satisfied with what is going on in the present moment as it is, with nothing else attached. And then lastly, the problem with the self is that it creates a spiritual gap because your self blocks you from the incredible growth that spiritual journaling, which we'll get to in level 4, can give you. It's so averse to what I'm saying because it knows that it will have to change, that it doesn't let you into that level 4 journaling. It's too scary. So tying this all back to reflective journaling, reflective journaling is essentially building the meta skill of understanding and navigating your own selfishness. Becoming aware of the frames through which you come to college with, of the glass of your spaceship, of you looking through the glass at space, and when it's helping and when it's harming you. How do we reflectively journal is the next question. Once we realize that, there's a lot of methods, all of which I have more of in my Cosmic Journaling Kit, templates of the methods. There's freeform, which is where you just write out exactly what it is that you're feeling, thinking, and then ask the higher level questions, which are, why are you thinking that? How is it affecting you? Where is it coming from? There's narrative journaling, which is a particularly powerful method that I love, which is rooting in an experience and really feeling into that experience again, what it is you're feeling, what it is you're thinking, and then going the next level, which is why did that happen in that experience? How are you relating to that experience looking back? Because the experience is not out there in some experience land. It's related to in the present. Every time you bring back up the memory or the experience, it changes based off of your present self. There's letter journaling, which is writing a letter to a friend to express gratitude or what you love about them. Or maybe it's to forgive them for something that they did to wrong you. And in that process, questioning what frames in yourself made you think they wronged you, how that affected you, why that affected you that way. And then if you can get yourself to do it, letting you forgive them. There are reflective journaling meta questions, which you can use in all of these journaling methods. These are the meta questions which all reflective journaling essentially does. So let's dive into some of them with an example on my career as a grounding in answering each of these questions so that we get really concrete on what questions you ask in level 2 journaling and how you can ask them. So the first question is, what are you experiencing right now? What frames are you experiencing? For my career, the frames that I'm experiencing, one of them is a value, which is I really want to prioritize purpose over just profit. The second question is, how is this frame affecting you or making you relate to the world? It's making me want to do super purposeful things, like writing this YouTube script and giving you this video. Why is it doing that is another meta question. Well, I want to create a world in which college doesn't just grow us academically, but spiritually, where it makes us more knowledgeable, loving, and conscious. I went through all 4 years of undergrad in Cornell, and I loved the experience. I grew into who I am now. But it really never grew me spiritually. There's so many things that I never got in what I feel an education should truly give. And that's what I'm trying to give with these videos. Now, the next question is, where is this frame coming from? I told you a little with being in college, but another reason this frame is here is 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, I used to be super niched in the Obsidian personal knowledge management space. I've been having this channel, I've been creating videos on it for 5 years. It's been a while. And I had this era where I really wanted to become financially free. And so I niched down to be super strategic. And I said, I'm going to make a whole bunch of Obsidian content. And I'm going to do it so well that I'll be able to become financially free finally. And it worked. But it also made me feel awful. because I built myself my own cage. I was so niched into this world that I stopped feeling creative. I stopped feeling like I was learning from my content. And I also felt like PKM, even as valuable as it is, it wasn't at the root thing that I wanted to help college students realize, which was spiritual growth. So it felt really inauthentic because I wasn't getting at the root problem. I was solving the external problem, as we were saying earlier, but not the root internal frame. If you want to check out more of that journey, I have a video on it, on why I left Obsidian PKM for Conscious College. Dives more into that story. So that fear continues to build this frame of wanting to value purpose over profit, because I don't want to turn back into that phase of doing Obsidian content or some other really niche thing that is only getting at the external problem. Where might this frame lead to is another meta-reflective journaling question. Well, hopefully success. And it also might lead to being super airy-fairy, out of the box, not being practical. I'll live in a box because I'll be homeless. That is also where it might lead to. I have to admit that possibility. Thankfully, I have a job at the Octalysis group, so hopefully that doesn't happen. But if I record my next video and I'm in a box, then you know why. How might a friend interpret this frame? Well, they might see it as very aspirational but impractical, which is how a lot of them have interpreted it. Or they might be supportive if they're more into this journey as well, which I have some friends that are into that too. But there's a lot that don't get it. And I have to accept that. How do my individual frames feed into the collective is another reflective question. Well, this one, I hope to push this spiritual frame out to college students and help them build it. It's definitely not common. Most freshmen I talk to are not into this whole sphere, but I'm trying to bridge the self-improvement to spiritual sphere. That's my goal. Next question is, have I consciously created my own frames or am I following someone else's? I've consciously contemplated this value of purpose, but I didn't get it from myself. I got it from myself after getting it from somewhere else, which is really important. But I got it from actualize.org, Ken Wilber, John Vervaeke, Scott Britton, and so many more other really awesome creators that are on this spiritual journey too. What frames am I using to do this reflection? That's a really funny meta reflective question because I'm using reflective journaling to do the journaling on this frame. And then finally, where might this reflection process lead? And does that scare me? This reflection process might lead into realizing I'm too airy-fairy with my purpose, and I actually need to be more practical to become financially free before I can do stuff like this. And that's really scary, of course. But that's a part of reflective journaling. It's a part of unveiling the self. Myself is scared at that idea. And that's funny too, is the self can be identified with spirituality. And so it's scared of changing away from being aware of its own changing, which is a really meta sort of self. Now, the last thing to ask about reflective journaling, level 2, is what should we be building with this reflection, with this reflective journaling? We've talked about the frames, your sensations, perceptions, emotion, thought loops, behaviors, and more. But is there a concrete grouping of things? Well, there is. I made it in my cosmic journaling kit, which I talked about and you can get in the description below. I have 3 main sections for what you can be building with this, which lead into decision journaling as well, level 3. Those are the cosmic compass, the shadow compass, and journaling constellations. So I'll really roughly say what those are. So the cosmic compass is your guiding light in your college cosmos. It is your purpose/career, your ideal self, your values, your attributes, what you're naturally good at, the skills, the things you've built across your life, your alliance, the people who help you pursue your life purpose in college, career, and finally the wheel of life. That's your cosmic compass. And there's a lot of journaling, reflective questions in there to help build that. Then there's your shadow compass, which is all the things making it harder to pursue your cosmic compass. Your emotions, your thought loops, your behaviors, limiting beliefs, relationships, information diet, the environment that you're in physically, core wounds, which are unprocessed experiences that are still affecting you to this day. Now, I don't want you to have the frame that they're all bad. As we said, the self is trying to help you, not something to be dismissive of. It's something to come at with compassion and love. And then the last thing that you can build with reflective questions is your journaling constellations, which are groupings of reflective questions helping you navigate a certain life domain. Your health, your career, your life purpose, romantic partner, friends, family, clubs and community, money, your physical environment, personal growth, play and joy, and finally, spirituality. So there's a bunch of reflective questionings there in the Cosmic Journaling Kit as well. Now, the last question that you might have for reflective journaling is, how do you know what to journal on? I just gave you an overwhelming amount of things that you could in a different life domains. So how the heck do you choose? It's a very difficult question. Follow your intuition. Your intuition has incredible power. It knows what it needs to navigate. So you don't have to make this more complex than it needs to be. Different things will pop out to you as more important to journal about and when. And sometimes you'll have all these reflective journaling questions in a section and you realize you don't need to journal on all of them. You just need to journal on one or two. Maybe you make up your own question that isn't in the journaling reflections because you realize that's what you should be journaling on instead. It's not a rigid science. It's not a system for uncovering your own awareness. Your journey is unique to you. You need to find what it is that's calling you in the moment. Use your own life as the playground of what you should journal on in college. I have a whole other video on this called Synergizing Success and Spirituality as a College Freshman. This is all about how to use your very pursuit of a success, of accomplishment in college as the grounding of your spiritual practice, of what you should journal on. As you come across external challenges, you navigate the internal frames creating them. So that's all of level 2, reflective journaling. And you might think, God dang, that was profound. How can there be more levels than that? That was already insane. That's just the beginning. The rabbit hole goes so much deeper because as great as reflective journaling is, the problem is we're still not making big picture decisions with the information. We're reflecting, but we're not deciding. And worse, we might still be acting from conformity without realizing it. Because we've navigated a lot of our self frames, but we haven't put an emphasis on how the collective frames impact the self ones. And that is where level 3 journaling, decision journaling, comes into play and is what we're going to dive into next. But let me take a short break before we do that. We are back with level 3 journaling. For some reason, it's incredibly cold. Like, it's cold as a polar bear's balls. And I'm sitting here. I got myself a hot cup of tea for this next section because I don't want to change out the outfit. Otherwise, I'm changing outfit throughout the video, and that would be kind of strange. So we're just going to face it and go through the rest of the video cold as heck. But it's okay because I'm so excited about telling you about level 3 journaling that maybe it'll energize me and heat me up. So we just dived into level 2 reflective journaling. Level 3 journaling is where you start making decisions rooted in not just selflessness, but authenticity. Going back to our analogy of space, Beforehand, we were navigating space using NASA's directions. We were asking about how the glass of our spaceship and us being in the spaceship was making us frame space, or our college cosmos. But we were still following NASA. Level 3 decision journaling is where we start not following others blindly, which we might not have been doing before either, but we go all the way. We go full circle, and we really question the frames that we're coming to, not just on an individual level, but on a collective level. We start navigating space with our own directions, which does not mean we don't take NASA's directions into account. It means that we question them, validate them ourselves, and then potentially still do the same thing NASA told us, or go on our own path. We start charting our own course through the college cosmos. Why is this important? Because selfless steering starts when you stop surviving, not just your individual frames, but your collective ones as well. The group is also often wrong. It doesn't take a deep analysis of history to see when the perception of what things were at a time was not what things should have been. Slavery, sexism, all this other stuff, which we'll dive into later. Echo piloting is also prevalent, which is you could be living someone else's purpose and dreams instead of your own. But you think they're your own because you haven't contemplated them deeply enough to see that you're acting out of conformity. There's also innovation sparking is hindered because under conformity, it's harder to innovate and progress. It's harder to go against the norm, even if that norm is progressive itself. Think about how meta that is. You might be conforming by being innovative. And so in order to be innovative, you need to innovate out of the conformist innovation matrix you're in. And then finally, there's spirituality blocker, because once again, if we're pursuing spirituality under selfishness or under conformity, then it's harder to reach the highest levels of spirituality, which is what we'll get into in level 4. So nuance is that, like with the self in the last section, conformity is not inherently bad. It's an unconscious form of conformity that is what we want to avoid. You might go through this whole process of decision journaling and realize that you're going to conform, but you did so consciously instead of unconsciously. Decision journaling is all about becoming selfless and authentic in your navigation of your frames as well as you can, and then using that to make decisions. That's why it's called decision journaling. I know, I'm so good at naming things. Reflective journaling is you reflect, daily journaling is you do daily stuff, and then decision journaling is you make decisions. Now, you might be saying as a counter argument, but Aiden, I do highly unconformist things all the time. I'm sure on the outside that might be true, but what's important to differentiate is that you might be unconformist in content, but conformist in structure. There's a big difference. Content is the face value of a thing. Structure is how you relate to the face value. So the content of something might be highly unconformist, but the structure of how you relate to it is very filled with conformity. Let me give you some examples from increasingly more nuance. You might follow the 10 commandments as a Christian. This, both in content and its structure, is conformist because it's not you who come to the 10 commandments your own. You are following them from another person's will. Now, that doesn't mean you can't question it, and I would encourage you to deeply reflect on why these commandments exist. And then if you end up finding that some of them still have value, follow them then. But if you're just doing it out of, oh, someone told me to say so, someone told me to do so, namely God, that is very conformist. Writing a love poem. On a content level, a lot of people don't write love poems. The love poem, if they do write, is deeply different from other people's. So how could that be conformist? Well, maybe you're writing the love poem because you've seen other people doing it and it's gone well for them. And so that's why you're writing the love poem. Taking unique pronouns in the LGBTQ community. It seems so unconformist in content. The LGBT community is inherently a small community, but structurally, you might be taking them so that you can fit in more with the community. If you've deeply thought about whether those pronouns resonate with you and they embody what you actually feel like, then it's a little bit more unconformist. But if you're relating it to it in the first way, very conformist. The expectation that you shouldn't cheat in a relationship. Content-wise, it seems so obvious. Like, how could that possibly be conformist? That's just how things are. You shouldn't cheat in a relationship. But that's not obvious at all. People used to cheat all the time back in history. There used to be much more openness to polygamy and multiple partners, especially if you're a guy. So this is not normal. This has been conformed into our relationship now. And actually, a lot of the ways that we relate to how relationships should be done is very conformist, depending upon the culture you're in. And there's no reason, no universal imperative for relationships to be that way. And the last example I'll give, which is one of the most insidious, is operating from a rational, scientific, materialist paradigm. This seems highly objective. This is what truth is coming at the world with a scientific lens. Maybe not for everything, but the truths that we do find through science, those, at least until they might be falsified, those are true. And yet, that also is a conformist assumption. If you're in an elite college where science dominates, you might never have actually done a scientific experiment yourself and truly unveiled whether they're accurate. A lot of the replication crisis in psychology nowadays is directly from these studies not being able to be replicated. But we have to take some of them at face value because we can't do all the studies ourselves. So see how you're taking those truths as belief, as true, because you can't test everything yourself, which is fair. I'm not saying that you should. And yet that is also a form of conformity. It's an assumption that you can uncover truths about the world through science. When have you deeply contemplated for an hour or more on what science actually is? And can you validate the scientific truths outside science? Because you can't use science to validate science. That's a circular reasoning. So a counter argument I was saying is, well, if conformity is working, why should I leave it? It's practical. That's exactly what the self wants you to think that we talked about earlier. The self doesn't want you to see how conformist you're being, because just like navigating the individual self's frames, navigating the collective's frames forces you to change. Maybe you realize that you don't want to put on pronouns in the LGBT community. And I'm not targeting just the LGBT community. I'm using anything. Any group can fall for these things. Maybe you realize I don't want to be Christian anymore, or I don't want to follow it as heavily. Maybe you realize, oh my God, I can't be as scientific and rational as I was before. It breaks down in some cases of my life, and I need to start taking into account spiritual ideas too. Let's give some more examples for why and how you might be conformist so that I really dig this point in. And in order to give those examples, I'm going to be talking to you in the structure of values, beliefs, and emotions and thought loops and whatnot that I think you probably have if you're watching this video. And the reason is there's actually an entire theory out there, theories upon theories of human development and how across societies, across individuals, across groups over history, humans have developed different value structures and in response to their environment. The one I'll be using predominantly is spiral dynamics, which was created by Claire Graves in the 1950s and 60s, and then popularized by Don Beck and Christopher Cohen. Fantastic theory. I would love to make videos on it in the future. I'm going to be assuming that you're coming from an orange-green mixed spiral dynamic structure, which is probably what you are if you're an elite college freshman, because in the US at least, that's the dominant structure most of colleges are at, especially elite ones. So how might you be acting under conformity inside of the various frames that we've been talking about throughout the video? Perception-wise, you might perceive colonialism as bad. Emotionally, you probably have anger when you experience sexism. Thought loop-wise, you think often about how to advance your individual career. Behavior, you have some sort of self-improvement / health-conscious habit of some sort. Maybe you go to the gym. Maybe you do jujitsu. Maybe you play tennis like I did. Beliefs. You might believe all culture and morals are fundamentally relative. It's impossible to say one is just better than the other. Ever. Depends on the context. Motivation. You might be motivated to do good in the world in some sort. And finally, value-wise, you might value LGBTQ rights. So this is all conformity if you haven't questioned it. If you haven't stepped outside of the frame and seen how it is that you are operating under socialization rather than your own self-made, self-come-to beliefs. A thought experiment that might help you see this: imagine if you were born inside of Saudi Arabia, or the slums of India, or Mongolia, in some really remote region. How differently would you relate to the world in that case? Would you have the frames that you do now? What I'm trying to point you towards is that unless you've stepped outside of your frames and seen how they are themselves conformist, and then question them and come to them yourself again, then you're acting under conformity. Not necessarily in content, but absolutely in structure. Only at the second tier of developmental structures in spiral dynamics, which is yellow and turquoise, do you start to have an integral approach to all the structures through which you can frame college. At green and orange, there is not an appreciation for all of the incredible amount of variation there are, and when some are relatively better than others. This is a mistake of the green worldview, is that all cultures are relative, and that it's impossible to say relatively when one is better than the other. Yes, there is an appreciation at yellow and turquoise for the relativity of cultures, but that does not mean on a relative scale that some values, some beliefs, some actions in a specific context will not be better than others. There's also a special aspect of conformity which comes from your information diet. Your information diet profoundly impacts what it is that you believe frame-wise in college. Some examples might be if you watch Alex Hormozy a lot, you have a very orange business-minded perception of the world because of consuming him. Ali Abdaal, I used to watch him a lot. He has a very green orange perspective of college and content creation. Actualize.org might be someone you watch. Very aspirational, easily yellow turquoise mix in his content there. Might watch me. Yellow turquoise mix, I hope, as well. But I want you to see how the information that you consume is food. It impacts the frames through which you come to college with. And this happens not only on an individual level, but on a collective, as we've been navigating. I want to give 3 more examples of collective frames and socialization just to really hammer in this point. One example is when I used to be on the speech team at Cornell. This was a group that made speeches to perform at tournaments about whole bunches of things. Could be economics or policy or whatnot. And when I was in the speech team, I didn't notice this as much because I wasn't as immersed in this whole frame language. But outside of it now, I can see how heavily LGBTQ influenced it was, to the point where actually most people in speech that I knew of were in the LGBTQ community, which, again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the community inherently. I have many friends in it, and I myself consider myself as a part of it. But the frames were so green in spiral dynamic worldview that people were unwilling to see the value in perspectives like an orange or a even blue or amber perspective of spiral dynamics. More conservative perspectives. It was riddled with LGBTQ values. Another example is architecture majors. This, as a major, I hear often at Cornell, is like incredibly toxic productivity in general. Again, these are general stereotypes. It might not be true of you specifically. Super toxic productivity, super busy-minded, and they often make fun of engineering students because the engineers and the architecture majors have this thing where the architects are always annoyed that the engineers think their designs are impractical, and the engineers are always annoyed at the architects for designing things that are too airy-fairy and beautiful and not practical. Again, these are frames that architecture majors adopt, and then it makes it normal to work after hours because the frame is, if I'm an architecture major, I work longer. That's what I do. Finally, we have STEM as a whole frame in general. STEM students, in gross generalities for frames, tend to be more practically oriented in their pursuits for career because humanities is less obviously practical in society right now. They also sometimes have a superiority complex over humanities, like, oh, we do the harder stuff, which, again, has some merit. STEM is harder to grasp intuitively because evolutionarily humans were not developed to understand math in the same way that we can understand language and stories in the humanities. So what decision journaling is all about, keeping this in mind, is making decisions in your life rooted in selfless authenticity. And that means deeply evaluating your self and collective frames. Question is, how do you know when you're not being conformist? I want you to contemplate this question, just like the other question of why don't we navigate our self-relationships more, our internal relationships and frames. I'm going to assume that you contemplated that for a bit. The reason is, first and foremost, you have a personalized decision outcome. Even if that outcome is something that actually is the conformist outcome, you still didn't do so out of conformity because you deeply considered how it connects to your own values, your own beliefs, and whatnot. Another is you have a deep self-understanding. You've done the work of reflective journaling, of daily journaling, and you've thought about what your career/life purpose, your values, and whatnot are. You have a conformity appreciation. You understand how pervasive conformity is and how collective frames impact your self ones. And you've done the work on understanding how you might be operating from conformity. And then finally, your survival separate. The groups that are influencing you are not integral to your survival. There is nothing that will get you more invested in thinking that you have to follow a group's frames than them being crucial to your survival. And the reason is, if they're crucial to your survival, as we know, the self is deeply survival oriented, it can deeply self-deceive you into thinking you're not acting out of conformity, or that the conformity is okay, because it's integral to you surviving. So, keeping this in mind, what are the decision journaling methods? What connects all of the methods together that you can ask yourself to do the stuff we've been talking about? The connector is the question, so what? Like, why does all the things that we've done in reflective journaling and daily journaling matter for my decisions? And there's 3 different major groups of decision journaling questions: evaluative, comparing, and changing. Let's go through each. So evaluative journaling questions are all about evaluating, judging the frames through which you're coming to college from yourself and from a collective view. Some meta questions for this are, what value/principle/goal/purpose can I judge this frame off of? How does this frame stack up to a chosen value, goal, or purpose? What frame am I using to evaluate this frame? And is that frame valid? How does this frame pragmatically help me? What might this frame be missing? How selfish is this frame? How conformist is this frame? An example of all of these meta questions is when I realized I was taking a frame of curiosity and purposefulness too hard instead of prioritizing excellence and perseverance. And the reason is because I was too immersed in the whole spirituality, self-improvement community and prioritizing being super curious and open-minded all the time, which is good. But I neglected the more orange worldviews and spiral dynamics of excellence and perseverance because I saw them as beneath me. I'm like, I don't need to focus on those. I'm into spirituality. And that was actually operating out of conformity. You can still get affected by conformity even if you've deeply understood this whole process. In fact, it will never stop affecting you. If you ever think you've been stopped being affected, you're most affected. Then we have comparing journaling questions, which is where we start going multi-frame. Instead of evaluating one frame, we're comparing multiple frames together. Some meta questions are, how did this frame reinforce, diminish, or contradict this frame? How is this frame similar or dissimilar to this frame? Which of my frames tend to dominate the others? Is this frame better or worse at meeting the standard than this frame? What might both of these frames be missing? What frames am I using to compare these frames? And is that frame valid? What is the difference in selfishness between these frames? What is the difference in conformity between these frames? An example of me using these meta questions to come to my own insight is that I realized my frame for growth was very different from other people's frames for growth. I like revealing my own self-deceptions. It literally is pleasurable to me. It's like eating a chocolate cookie. And I did not realize, or I understood but I didn't appreciate that most people are not like this. And so for a long time in my friendships, I would be the annoying pointer outer. And it worked because I could see it. That's the problem, is it was so obvious to me how other people were deceiving themselves that I would point it out to them thinking that I was going to receive confetti and balloons in return. And then I just got angry comments of defense and criticism back. And I didn't appreciate enough until afterward that most people don't get pleasure from having their own self-deception unveiled, which is part of what I'm trying to do in this work with you, is teaching you to frame uncovering your own self-deceptions as not something to be sad about, but something to be energized by. Here's a frame you can use to come to college with. Every time you unveil one of your own self-deceptions or how you're being conformity, think, wow, I got as far as I did in college while still having that negative frame. That's incredible. What can I do in the future? And that completely reframes how it is that you see unveiling these frames, which then leads into changing journaling questions, the most powerful of the decision journaling methods you can do, meta questions. What different frame can I adopt that might help me with a chosen value / purpose / goal? What evidence or experience suggests that this frame is working? Which individual or collective frames might resist this change? How can I change to that frame effectively? How can I redesign or reframe this old frame? What signals will tell me the new frame is taking root? How can I communicate this frame change to my friends and other relationships with empathy and clarity? And how can I change to this new frame rooted in selflessness and authenticity? An example of me using these meta questions was when I changed my major from psychology, from HBHS to psychology. HBHS is the really disgustingly long major name of health, biology, and society. Human health, biology, and society, I think. Anyways, I came into college with that major because I was still going through my anabolic dieting period. And I thought my goal in life was to make people less obese. I was like, wow, thinking about food all the time and being burdened by health issues sucks. I want to help other people do that. And what I didn't realize was that I was doing this major out of my own self-relationship with health, which is that I didn't have a healthy relationship with my body. And therefore, I was projecting that by wanting to navigate other people's unhealthy relationships with their body. Once I navigated that in my freshman year at college and I stopped doing the anabolic diet, I started eating more healthily, I realized I needed to switch majors because I didn't have passion and purpose in that one anymore. And so then I took it full circle and I thought, well, that's strange how I was doing this major out of a projection of my own shadow material. I should go into psychology. So I ended up going into a major to study myself, which is, funnily enough, how a lot of people get into psychology. That's decision journaling, is evaluative, comparing, and changing journaling questions, rooted in selfless authenticity. If you get here, you are way farther than most people in journaling, and I commend you for even getting this far in the video. But there's still a challenge at level 3 journaling, which is we're rooted more in practicality than in spirituality. It's all about how can I make more authentic, selfless decisions. We still haven't gotten to the foundational root of journaling, where the most power of all is to be had. So if you'll join me, let's go to level 4, the most powerful level of journaling, spiritual journaling. Level 4, spiritual journaling. This is the deepest level of journaling possible. And a warning before we go into this section, this is deep stuff. So even more so than with level 2 and level 3, if you don't feel like you're in a decently stable position in life right now, then I would not recommend you continue. And also deeply question everything that I'm about to tell you, because you must experience the truths for yourself rather than taking them at face value. If you took them at face value, it'd still be conformity. So, at level 4, spiritual journaling, we're journaling not just about our day or about the patterns of our frames, how they're affecting us, why they're affecting us, and where they're coming from, or even how we're being conformist. I don't even know if that's a word now that I think about it. I'm going to just say it is, branding it as a word. At level 4 journaling, spiritual journaling, we are journaling about how we are actively constructing our entire sense of reality. Every single thing. And we're doing this to separate ourselves from ultimate unity, from infinity. Going back to our space analogy, we're no longer focused on reflecting through a telescope or about the glass of our spaceship or ourselves in the ship, or even how to chart our own course through space. We are journaling about how we are constructing all of it. Ourself, the glass, the space outside, everything. The insight is that you don't find the universe. The universe finds itself through you. Let me give you some examples, because I know it's a little out there. You're constructing what you're taking from this video. Think about it. There's no universal reason the construction that you have for this video is the one that you have to have. Your frames, your sensations, perceptions, emotions, thought loops, behaviors, all that background stuff, individually and collectively, is constructing how it is that you're interpreting what I'm saying right now. Hopefully, it's coming across as insightful. But it is a construction, even if it's insight. You're constructing how you view college. Do you frame it as purposeful or profitable? Do you frame it as a place to grow your knowledge? You're constructing how you perceive your friends. Now you might say, no, Aiden, if my friend does something bad to me, like they lied to me, a romantic partner, they cheated on me, how could I be constructing that? They did that. I'm not blaming you for what they did to you, but it is absolutely your responsibility for how it is that you relate to that thing. Again, there's no universal thing that says cheating is bad. Cheating is bad from a relativistic, selfish point of view. That's it. From a universal perspective, there's nothing bad about cheating. It just is. You're constructing reality with the language you use to label things. Labeling this as a hand, this as a microphone, this as a short Dutch person. There's nothing objective about the English language. I could be speaking in Spanish. Quiero hablar en español ahora. Imagine if I did all my videos from Spanish now. That'd be kind of funny. Or I could speak in Dutch. Ik kan nu in Dutch spreken als je wil. Kan jij mij verstaan of nee? There's nothing objective about the language you use. And notice the language you use shapes the way that you see reality. It shapes the form of the world. If you didn't have the word for microphone in your language, if you've never seen a microphone before, you see this and you don't see microphone. You see black object. Similarly, if you have the word for atom or quark or molecule, and you see a quark, an atom, or a molecule, probably more accurately a molecule or an atom. I don't think we have ways to see quarks yet, but you will label it as that. There's no reason it has to be called quark or atom or molecule. That's how you've labeled it. You're constructing it. Your memories, constructing them all the time. Every time you bring them up, they're different, not the same. And most importantly, you're constructing yourself. This gets at everything that we've talked about in the video so far. You're constructing yourself on an individual and a collective level. And here's the big insight, is you might think, okay, Aiden, I can accept that I'm constructing myself on an individual level, but not a collective. The collective's outside of me. That's an assumption. The collective is not outside of you. The collective is a relationship to your internal self. There is no separation. There is no duality. Universe, uni, one. This is the fundamental insight that all spiritual traditions across history have been trying you to understand. There is no separation. The separation comes from the need to survive a sense of self. And you are doing this at all times, on an individual and a collective level. There's a very interesting metaphor used in Zen spirituality of what it feels like to come to this awareness. And that is, you look at an object, for example, the sky, something that normally you would consider outside of you. And it feels like the sky is falling on you. And it's because you've realized that the sky is no closer to your head, psychologically, spiritually, than your hand is in front of you. It is still awareness. The only duality, the only thing making you think that it's not you, is the perception that it is super far away. But it's still in your awareness. It is still you. Same is true of your friends, of college itself, of everything in yourself. It's all itself. It's self. It's awareness all the way down. You ever heard the turtles thing? Yeah, that's where that comes from. Nothing in reality says that a thing has to have meaning. It's all relative, all entirely self-created. There's 3 different levels of relativity, which you can realize this here. Sociocultural relativity is what you probably already have. That's a very green perspective, that cultures are relative, different values, different rituals. That's easy relativity because it's obvious once you've known it. Then there's epistemological relativity, which is the relativity in what you can know. Knowing itself is relative. And then finally, there's ontological relativity, which is realizing that the very ground of being, the very way that you relate to the world, is entirely and completely relative. Not just the easy thought like, I see different things because I'm at a different perspective. That's very like time-bound, space-bound, easy relativity. I'm talking the very way that you relate to the world on a very ground of being is different. Why are you doing this constructing? Because as we've said, it's the only way that a self can survive. It's the only way an infinite can be made aware of itself, is through finitude. If you stopped doing this, you would die. Now, then you might say, well, why is this good? Why is the awareness that you're constructing everything a good thing? Why should we even be doing spiritual journaling? Well, ultimately, the paradoxical answer is that there is no reason you should be doing anything at all. Because from a universal lens, there's no reason to relatively favor anything else. But there is some pragmatic and some spiritual reasons nonetheless on a relative scale that we can use. Because ultimately, I'm not expecting you to be able to instantly internalize this insight. Even I haven't internalized it. This is something you'll be working on for the rest of your life. Pragmatically, this is incredible to realize because you realize all problems you've ever had have been self-created. Again, not saying that you shouldn't navigate problems externally, but that the only reason you even see that external thing as a problem is because of your internal relationship to it. And the insight that comes from this is suffering is what comes when you argue with what is. This is what's called attachment in a lot of areas of the spiritual community. When you attach to a reality that is not what is, you suffer. Now, the insight of this is not that you don't have desires, that you don't have ambitions, that you don't work to change things. It's that you do so with an understanding that nothing will ever fulfill you if you're not fulfilled by your own self in the moment. And this might take years to truly embody. There's a notion called burning karma in the spiritual space, which is that you can't instantly realize some of these fundamental truths until you've burned through some of your karma, like meeting your survival needs, or having a good romantic relationship, or having lots of sex, or making lots of money at some point. And what counts as stuff that you need to burn through is dependent upon the person. It's completely contextual. For me, I know I need to have a profound physical relationship, romantic relationship, before I can truly embody all of these to the maximum level. I need to have a purposeful, fulfilling, profitable business before I can feel like I've burned through that karma. College is the mirror for what you need to grow. Are you attached to something that you become aware of? That's what you need to work on growing through next. Are you navigating an internal relationship with an external problem that's making it harder to pursue your career or to have good friendships? That's what you need to navigate next. Your entire construction is the playground of your growth. That's what's so beautiful about this insight, is that you don't need to go into some far off Buddhist temple or a 7-day retreat in the woods. That might be a part of your path, but ultimately you can practice spirituality right here, right now, everywhere, at all times. This moment, as I am speaking right now, is the opportunity for you to begin your spiritual adventure. Every moment. Because ultimately every moment is just a construction of all the past moments and all the future moments combined here into the present. There is the thing that's so interesting about this insight is that it is completely tautological, which means it is by definition impossible to not prove or to prove. It exists outside of the realm of proof. This is why anyone who goes through a spiritual awakening like this, most of them say it's the most ultimate thing they've ever seen. Because there's no way to invalidate it. Any invalidation is done using the very same awareness that makes you aware that there's only awareness. So it's completely tautological. It's impossible. And the groundedness at which that lets you navigate life is truly gorgeous. It's honestly just miraculously celestial, cosmically, radiantly mystical. It is the most profound thing you'll ever experience because it is everything. You can practice this in any moment, anywhere, because everything is a part of awareness. Everything is a construction of yourself. Imagine the hobby that you can do, which you can do at all times. No time is separate from your hobby. We always struggle in college because we're like, oh, I don't have enough time for my hobbies. At the end of the day, I've done all this academic work. I can't do my hobbies now. This is the hobby you could do at all times. Every second of every day, of every week, of every month, of every quarter, of every year, of till the end of time, you can practice this. That's beautiful. The analogy, bringing back to our space thing, that I like to say is this realization is like letting your ship off into space and then just going where the universe wills you. You're no longer guided by selfishness or by conformity, but rather by a deep, profound inner awareness of how you are constructing everything. And you flow with that insight rather than resist it. You're not attached. And even if you are attached, you're not attached to becoming unattached. You're just this spacious being witnessing your flight through space and how you're constructing all of it. And this is where we get to even more spiritual insights from this realization, which is this realization is so powerful because it's impossible to experience a metaphysical love for reality when you're so clouded by selfishness and conformity. You can't connect with this universal, non-dualistic nature, this emptiness, and simultaneously form, because it includes everything, unless you can get through the frames of survival that are keeping you from connecting to this profound nature. An insight that will ground you in this whole thing is that you are not the thinker of your thoughts. You are the space they arise in. You are the witness, as they call it in spiritual traditions. As I am speaking to you, the thoughts, the emotions, the other frames that come up, they are not you. They are the frames that yourself is surviving in. The planets, the nebulas, the galaxy clusters inside of the self cosmos, your college cosmos. And that's profoundly grounding because you can ground in this awareness, this just realization that you are experiencing everything that's coming up as it's coming up, as you're constructing it, without attaching to anything. Being is much more profound than meaning, but we chase meaning thinking that it will fulfill us. And once we once we flow with being, we realize that it was always inside of us. Because even not flowing with being was still an example of infinite awareness. Because infinite awareness, by definition, means infinite. It includes everything, even the non-awareness of itself. So even when you were unaware, you were still always inside of this infinite awareness. That's the very notion of non-duality. And once you stop separating yourself from that universe, even from when you were non-aware, you watch the setting sun dip over the horizon, and you know there was never a sun to dip. Only you. You smell flowers blooming and realize you are the smell. You hear the sound of your best friend calling from across the other end of the hall, and you realize you are them. You always were. You always were. Now, there's probably tons of counter arguments coming from the frames inside of yourself, which is fair. They are there to protect you from too radically transitioning to this realization without having done other work first. There's fear. Let me address some of those questions so that I might help you guide into this path a little better. You might say, isn't no meaning negative? This sounds like nihilism, Aiden. There's no meaning. Doesn't that suck? But here's the catch-22. Only if you project that no meaning sucks, does it suck? So you yourself are projecting a meaning onto the notion of no meaning, which if you believe in no meaning, shouldn't be possible because there's no meaning. Why does no meaning have to be a negative thing? Why can't it be the most beautiful thing ever? Because if there's no meaning, that means you get to create all the meaning. That's like the best possible outcome. You get to create your own meaning out of everything. It doesn't need to be forced on you. It is up to you. Another question you might have is, aren't we becoming more developed over time? If you look at history, it seems like we've been on a progressive movement. So aren't we progressive towards something? It's not like we can't be progressing towards anything. And that doesn't make sense because you're saying that everything's meaningless. So what are we progressing towards? Sure, we are becoming more complex, and it's beautiful where we're going into more and more conscious territory over the course of human history. And yet that is also a projection of meaning, a construction of meaning from the frames that you come to college with. You might say science helps us bypass this relativism, this non-meaning. And yet, no, it doesn't. Because as much as I love science, I've made scientific theories. I've done science experiments when I was a psychology major in college. Science cannot get around the meaning trap because ultimately science cannot validate itself. Something outside of science needs to validate science being able to come to fundamental truth about the world. And once you start digging into that, you realize that it can't, because science is done by scientists who have a relative perspective. We're entangled in what it is that we study. Notice the entire time I've been saying we construct our own reality. It's impossible to get an objective, completely material, universal understanding of something. Aside from the insight that you cannot get an objective, universal understanding of something. That's the only universal, objective thing there is. Because it is a tautology. It exists outside of meaning. An example would be even this cup. Simply labeling it as a cup, first off, requires an English language, which there's nothing objective about. I could have said copa if I wanted to be Spanish, or kop if I wanted to say in Dutch. So that's a projecting of meaning. Another thing is when I see this cup, I immediately feel an urge in my relationship to it to hold it. That is the affordance that this cup gives me. It has something I can grasp. Now I can grasp it. Notice how relative that is. If I was a fish, would I have had that relationship to it? No, because I don't have the relative construction that this is graspable. This cup is also white. But is it though? Because first off, scientifically, it's technically everything but white because the white light spectrum is what it's emitting. So, or is it all the colors? Because it's white. I think it's all the colors. Don't quote me on that one. But if I was with an eye that had different relative notions to what that color was, it wouldn't look like white to me. It might look like a different color. Deer see differently from cows, see differently from frogs, see differently from humans. It's all entirely relative. And then you get into space-time, which is that technically this cup is moving at profoundly different velocities depending upon the relative viewpoint of which you're looking at it. It's on Earth. Earth is moving really fast. Relative to me, though, it doesn't look like it's moving at all because I'm on Earth. And therefore, it is with me, not moving. To me, it's all relative. And so any abstraction of this cup is fundamentally false, objectively, because it's entirely relative. That is why science cannot help us bypass this. Any finite statement about the infinite is by definition false. The next thing you might say is, why don't mainstream spiritual practices do this? Why don't more of them talk about this on YouTube or about this on social media or whatnot? It's because they can't. Otherwise, they wouldn't be mainstream. They put the stuff they do because it's the current development level of most of humanity. Most people are not ready for the insights that I'm giving you right now, which is why I gave so many warnings. If you've gotten this far in the video, that's a profoundly developed mind for spirituality. And you should feel very proud of the fact that your mind is able to take this degree of spiritual, honestly, just like punching, because I've just really laid it all into you in like 3 hours. So that's why most mainstream practices don't do this, because it's terrifying. And when society is more developed, hopefully in a few decades and hundreds of years, as more people ascend up the spiral dynamic developmental path, or integral theory if you use that, to yellow, to turquoise, and maybe even past that, then you'll start seeing more of this spiritual stuff in mainstream society. But until then, they're putting the cart before the horse. They're talking about all the nice stuff of spirituality, the stuff that isn't too harmful to the ego, like the stuff we talked about in level 2 reflective journaling, that you are simply becoming aware of the frames that your self is surviving. That's pretty difficult to take, but it's not too difficult. The idea that you're constructing your entire sense of reality, that is too. That's out there. Now, the last thing that you might say is, why are you using finite language to point me towards the infinite? Didn't you just say that finitude can never describe the infinite? Exactly. I love where you're going. Here's the profound catch-22 is, I can only point you to the infinite with finite language because you haven't experienced the infinite yet. If you'd experienced the infinite, you wouldn't be watching this video. Or maybe you're just developing your experience of the infinite, and that's why you're watching it. But I can't point you to it because I can't make you experience it, because you need to experience it yourself. So the only tool that I have is pointing you to it with language. It's only a paradox if you think that the language is the thing I'm pointing to. There's a good metaphor in spiritual circles for this, which is, I am pointing you to the moon being non-duality, emptiness, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. And what you are doing is you are looking at my finger and mistaking the finger for the moon. Now, the last aspect of this is like, well, I've talked all about this, but how do you actually spiritually journal? What questions do you ask yourself? The meta questions of spiritual journaling are really profound. So here they are. How am I constructing myself? How am I constructing reality? How can I root more into being? Why am I constructing things that way? What purpose, values, relationships, context can I create that will allow me to be in a more spiritual way? And ultimately, spiritual journaling is not just those questions, it's all the other questions too. Level 3, decision journaling. Level 2, reflective journaling. Level 1, daily journaling. And the reason is, when you realize that you're constructing your entire sense of reality, all the other questions and every single thing that you construct becomes a thing to help you realize how you're constructing things and not realizing the infinite. So everything becomes a part of your spiritual journaling practice. It's all integrated, transcended, then integrated, transcended, then integrated. Transcend level 1, integrate it into level 2. Transcend level 2, integrate it into level 3. Transcend level 3, integrate it into level 4. Transcend and integrate. That means that journaling stops being your only spiritual practice. Journaling is just one out of all of the reflection practices that you could be doing. There's mindfulness, there's meditation, there's chanting, there's yoga, and so much more. Journaling becomes the most powerful when you realize that it is just one tool in your reflection tool belt. And the only reason I'm starting with journaling is because I have to start with something. And also, I think for freshmen, college students particularly, journaling is one of the most powerful because it's a very rooted way of reflection. You have to actually write something out. It grounds you. And the beautiful thing about this whole process of spiritual journaling, level 1, 2, 3, and 4, is that it gave me an unexpected realization. Because when I started journaling 6 years ago, I certainly wasn't thinking this is where it would lead me. I thought I was just becoming more emotionally centered, more self-understanding, more purposeful. I wanted to have something to serve as a memory bank that didn't just help me see space through a telescope, but actually let me adventure into space. That helped me see how I was framing space and how I could create my own journey through space. But ultimately, what I realized at the end of this process is that my entire college journey through the college cosmos, all it was, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 journaling, was realizing that the entire time I had been journaling about space, I was the space the whole time. You were the space the whole time. And if that's something that you want to explore more, I highly encourage you to check out my Cosmic Journaling Kit in the description below. It's free. It's a gamified, easy-to-use journaling system with over 200 journaling questions, 5 templates to help you grow your emotional centeredness, self-understanding, and purposefulness in college in under 15 minutes a day. It includes all 4 of the levels of journaling that we've talked about, and I think can help you integrate a lot of the things in this video. That's it. As always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Eat some peanut butter, and bye-bye.